What if you had a band who refused to give up on themselves, who wanted to take a chance later on in their lives? I mean, how many of us have been in that same situation, right? For those of you listening, maybe in your 30s or 40s, maybe as you move further into adulthood, you started to look back and you started to think, if I want to make a big change, take a big chance on something that I'm passionate about, it has to be now before I start to grow older, before, you get buried, unfortunately, in bills and in money. Well, this band, The National, found themselves in such a predicament. But before, of course, we get to the story of how they got to that situation to begin with, we need to go back to the beginning. Because what's interesting is, even though the National started to kind of make noise around the early to mid 2000s, they had been together since the early 90s. So for about 10 years, they had been together. Now, the group, The National, consists of their lead singer, Matt Berringer. And what's pretty cool is you have two sets of brothers in the band as well. And that's Aaron and Bryce, who are actually twins, not only brothers, but twins. And the other set of brothers, Brian and Scott, together. But they are not twins. But that's pretty cool. You have a band where all of them are all related to each other except for the lead singer. Now, the story of the roots of The National start like so many of our stories that involve these bands. It's a group of guys together. They're in college. Three of them even had been playing music together for many, many years before then. And they thought they were pretty good. They thought that they had something special. And they really were influenced by another indie band called Pavement, which we're going to get back to later because there's a cool story with The National and Pavement. But they, again, thought they had something, so they joined the twin brothers out in New York City. They weren't from New York originally. The twin brothers actually had started a record label, their own record label. They have an interest in it. One member of the brothers was already in the band, and the other one was more so a record producer. And he was just so hands-on in the making of their debut album, which was called The National, that eventually he hopped on and joined the band full-time. Now, as an official group, The National was pretty much, I would say, officially formed in 1999, so there definitely still was a gap. Like I said, these guys as a band did not really get their feet off the ground until their mid-30s. So at this point in time, they're in their mid to late, I would say their late 20s at this point. And even though they released their debut album, it was still kind of seen as a fun project, something. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was something that they were passionate about. They wanted to make music, but realistically, they looked at themselves and thought, as cool as it would be to have a band and be a musician full time and do this as a living, realistically, that's probably not going to happen. If we want to start families, if we want to provide for ourselves and for others, we have to have normal jobs. You have to have normal careers. And so they would get together and play still, and they would make music. They would do covers, especially of the pre-mentioned band. And that would lead them, because their set of brothers owned a record label, an indie one, they would help them record their material at little to no cost. And so they released their debut album, and then their follow-up album came a little later. Their second album was called Sad Songs for Dirty Lovers, and that was released a few years after their debut album in 2003. Now, their second album caught attention of a producer. And so for the first time, the band found themselves not really, not in a negative way, but not wanting to do this album in-house as they kind of were before. and they decided to take a chance. Again, this theme of taking a chance is very consistent with this story of the National. And so they decided to go with a new record producer for their second album, and it paid off. Specifically, and kind of oddly, they caught attention of French music critics and producers, which helped bump their song there. And kind of capitalizing on this new momentum, they decided to release an EP called The Cherry Tree. This EP was really where things started to drastically change for them as a group, because that EP caught the attention of the band The Walkmen, who said, "Hey, you guys are really good. We think that you should open for us on tour." And it was at that moment that they decided to go all in for the first time on their music, where all of the band quit their day jobs and decided to pursue this way of life full time. It was also at that time that they officially left the idea of producing their own material in-house. In fact, they said that as much as they appreciated it helping them kind of get their feet off the ground, they said that it was becoming too complicated, and so they signed with a new record label and they released their third album, Alligator. And boy, oh boy, did that decision pay off. Because Alligator is what this band is, I would say, mostly known for, is this album. And this album got them the attention that they deserved. It got them on Song of the Year, Record of the Year lists, especially Record of the Year. And that started to gain them momentum to sell out shows. Boxer was released just a few years after that. They had their own documentary that they filmed and then produced as well, that kind of took a behind-the-scenes look of them and their band. And that led to their biggest album to date. High Violet came out just a few years later, and I remember for myself that was the biggest and I think most well-known album that they have produced so far. You might remember it for its iconic album cover as well, and it did not disappoint. Now, one last thing for this video, one last question you could say is, where's the National today? Well, they have still continued to tour and release records almost consistently all the way up until this last year in 2024. So they are alive, they are doing well, and all of the band is still together. Check out next week.